To the UK now, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing a second showdown in Parliament over his Brexit strategy. He's demanding a snap election on the 15th of October should lawmakers try to prevent a no-deal Brexit. Johnson says such a bill would undermine the country's ability to negotiate with the European Union. But the EU says it hasn't received any new proposals from Britain to break the Brexit deadlock. Now, here's some of what Boris Johnson had to say in the House of Commons just a short while ago in response to a question from the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn.
The only thing that's standing in our way is the undermining of those negotiations by this surrender bill, which would lead to more dither and delay. We delayed in March, we delayed in April, and now he wants to delay again for absolutely no purpose whatever. What does he intend by this? We are spending, in this government, we're spending £1 billion to put 20,000 more police officers on the streets. He wants to spend £1 billion a month net to keep us in the EU beyond October the 31st. And I will never allow that.
So that was the British Prime Minister. Now, I spoke to our correspondents, Charlotte Potts in London and Terry Schultz in Brussels. And I began by asking Charlotte what was at stake in Parliament today.
Very heated debate there again, questions and answers for Boris Johnson there. And one thing we can say is that Parliament is just extremely divided. There are those that want the Brexit, those that are against Brexit, those that want a second referendum, those that want Brexit but are opposed to no deal. And it remains that Parliament is extremely divided. Now, one thing that they do seem to be able to rally behind is the bill that is on the table today, and that would prevent Boris Johnson from taking the country out of the European Union without a deal on October 31st. So this bill would basically force Boris Johnson to go to the European Union and ask for an extension, and this time around that would be until January 31st, so a 3-month extension, and Boris Johnson, if this bill is successful, would have to ask the European Union for that.
And Terry, in Brussels, what do these developments in London mean for the EU and preparations for Brexit?
Amrita, the EU side still continues to say that it is waiting on London to get its mind made up, to quell all this chaos and come back to Brussels with a clear plan on how it wants to approach Brexit, on whether it truly will try to get out on October 31st, and that's very much up in the air. But in the meantime, the European Union is basically preparing for a hard Brexit, for preparing there to be a departure of the British government with no deal. And toward that end, today it released what it's calling its final preparedness checklist. It's reminding everyone in the other 27 EU countries, businesses and citizens alike, of what it will mean if there's no deal, of what new labeling, requirements there will be, of what new localization rules may apply to workers, of even how there will be differences in how their private data is treated if Britain crashes out without a deal. So here they're basically going on worst case scenario that nothing will be arranged.
Right. Terry Schultz in Brussels and Charlotte Potts in London. Thank you both very much. And to make more sense of what is happening in the House of Commons and in British politics right now, I have our Brexit analyst, Alex Forrest-Whiting, with me. Hi, Alex. Now tell us, what alternatives does Boris Johnson still have to get his way?
Well, you'd think he would still be trying to put pressure on those rebel MPs, but last night he sacked those rebel MPs, 21 of them, 20 of whom used to be ministers for the Conservative Party. So he can't put pressure on them. It looks like it is going to go through the House of Commons tonight, but it still then has to go through the House of Lords. That's the second chamber, the upper chamber. And there will be a lot of pressure put on by government whips to try to persuade those Conservative lords to what's called filibuster, to keep talking, to try to talk this out so that it doesn't become law, because everything is about timing this week. Next week, remember, Parliament is suspended. That is what was decided by the government last week. So it is all about timing. If it goes through the House of Lords, it still needs to have what's called royal assent. That means it has to be signed off by the Queen. Now, there is the possibility that against all convention, Boris Johnson and his team could try to slow down that process so it doesn't get that assent by Friday. And when the suspension, the prorogation happens, that bill is no longer around. It falls. So there is still much that he could do. His main thing he wants, though, as he keeps saying, is a general election. Despite having said over the past few days, I don't, it's very clear he does. But can he get it? He needs 2/3 of MPs in Parliament to support him on that.
Exactly, and to get this 2/3 of MPs, he'll have to get the Labour Party to support him. Will the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, agree to that?
A very good question. And at the moment, it's very clear he wants a general election, but at the moment he doesn't seem to be adhering to that call from Boris Johnson, because they are sticking by this rebel alliance and saying we've got to get this no-deal Brexit bill through Parliament before we can start talking about an election. But pressure is on him, not least from his own MPs and particularly those on his front bench, but also by other parties. The Scottish nationalists in Scotland, they're desperate for an election, and they will be putting pressure on Jeremy Corbyn to say, yes, we'll go for an election, but we need to set what the date is. The problem is, can they guarantee that Boris Johnson or his those people around him who are very strong will adhere to any date that is set? So there is still a lot to play for within Parliament.
Right, Alex Forrest-Whiting, our Brexit analyst, thank you very much for shedding light on this rather complicated issue at the moment.